Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. We are thrilled to have Laura Tamblyn Watts joining us today from CanAge. Laura has a really fascinating background, and I am excited to share her with you today and get to learn a little bit more about her. So welcome, Laura. Thanks for joining us. I'm grateful to have you here.
Delighted to be here.
Awesome. So let me give you a little bit of background on Laura. And, I know you have a choice as to what podcast you listen to. And I think she's going to be able to share some things that will be very helpful and beneficial to all of us today. So just to give you some context, she is the founder and the CEO of CanAge, which is Canada's national seniors advocacy organization. She's a passionate advocate on a variety of urgent issues affecting our older Canadians, including long-term care, home care, financial security, elder abuse, healthcare, ageism, and inclusion of marginalized communities. So I'm super grateful that you are an advocate, because all of these things are hot topics right now. And so I want us to dig into that. But before we do, just give a little more background on Laura. She previously served as the Chief Public Policy Officer at the Canadian Association of Retired Persons before she established CanAge at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, CanAge has emerged as a go-to media commentator and trusted voice for Canadian seniors, underscored by Laura's more than 20 years experience defending the rights and the dignity of older people as a lawyer and thought leader. She's actively involved in seniors' legal, financial, and regulatory reform initiatives in Canada, the US, Australia, and the South Pacific, including sitting on federal government advisory boards, working in groups guiding policy, standards, and legislation. She's also written numerous papers and contributed extensively to research on aging issues, and is frequently a highly sought after media commentator. And I believe, has your book released? You wrote a book?
The book is being released in winter 2024.
Okay, so keep an eye out for that. It'll be the 3 a.m. guide to your aging parents. So a little bit of time yet, but will be a great gift and just a wonderful amount of information I'm sure that you're sharing with all of us on how we deal with, our aging parents, and even preparing ourselves, for what that next chapter looks like to make it easier on our kids. So Laura, let's jump in here. Share with me, like, how did you move from lawyer, advocating, litigating, to being this strong advocate for seniors in many different facets?
I've always worked in social justice areas. So I came up through the women's movement and did a lot of work, particularly in the area of domestic violence and intimate partner violence and rights. Also did some work in the child and youth justice movement. So I was a lot on cases that dealt with issues that were school-related abuse or even religious-related abuse of kids. So those kind of hard topics to be working on. At the same time, I was doing a lot of volunteering in the way of these things. I think that the whole person ends up in the mix. I started volunteering with the Alzheimer's Society in high school, and I was directly involved also in the care of many older people in my family's life. And I think that those things all put together, topped off with a law degree and stirred up with a stick, ends up with somebody who's really interested in how older people's rights are in existence or not in existence, how they can be defended, where ageism and what are we thinking about age, how are we managing to plan, or I think for many of us not plan for our own aging selves or our aging population if we're looking at it at a bigger view. So I think that all of these different pieces are helpful. I think the most helpful part that the law degree gives you is the ability to question how things are, that you don't necessarily just accept, oh, there's a rule on that, or there's a policy on that, or that's what the law is, but there's a empowering aspect to saying, well, that's what it is right now. Doesn't mean that that's not what it can change. And so we've been very busy in trying to bring positive change to all Canadians.
Wow. And that's such important work. I mean, you hit on a number of things that I happen to be super passionate about too, especially domestic abuse. Like, that's such a incredible, horrific topic. And through COVID, became even more pronounced. But even elderly care and long-term care and home care, like all of these became such bigger topics than sort of out of sight, out of mind until we hit COVID. And then all of a sudden it's all like right front and center.
I think it's really important. And when we're thinking about where we are in our conversation about who gets rights and who gets support and who gets money and who doesn't, of course, that's tied up in what we think about people. So if we imagine, for instance, what we used to think about women and women's issues and domestic violence, it was really hard to get attention. It was an answer we always had to give. Why doesn't she leave? And we didn't have judges or support services to either understand or help navigate. And, that's where we are right now with older people. What many folks don't realize is that 1 in 6 Canadian seniors will be subject to abuse and neglect, 1 in 6. And when it comes to financial abuse, we actually think that number is even higher. We saw over the course of the pandemic about an increase of 250% of elder abuse. And part of that had to do with the fact that you were locked up with your abuser. A lot of it had to do with the incredibly fast reach out of targeted vulnerable people for frauds and scams during COVID-19, but targeted to seniors or targeted specifically to older people, not sort of general targets. And we saw a real increase of physical abuse as well. There was no one to reach out to. Nobody could come into your home. And so as a result, people got even more vulnerable to abuse. And you know how many dollars elder abuse got? Well, let's see. Yeah, intimate partner violence got about 5 to, and then I think they added more, about $700 million in federal support pretty quickly. Children got about the same. Elder abuse got $0.
Oh my goodness.
And there was arguably far more elder abuse than there was any other form of abuse. So when we're thinking about, are we seeing ageism at work, or are we seeing the attention being given to different groups? We talk about seniors just before elections, but the reality is we do very little for older people to make their lives better.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, where do you go, right? If you're a senior and you're experiencing this, and because you feel like your voice is no longer heard, right? And it's horrific. Like when you think about what potentially can happen, like I didn't realize the stats were that high.
Yeah, nobody does, because we don't
Yeah.
talk about it in that way. And so this is a great opportunity to raise awareness. One of the things we talk about also is, age and ageism as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations.
Yes.
And, I do a lot of work with employers and chambers of commerce and other types of discussions around workforce issues. It's interesting because we actually desperately need people to work longer. We're desperately short of staff, and it's only going to get more so. So really thinking about how we're going to be working with 5 generations in the workplace, and then what policy implications fall out from that as well. So a lot of people saying, well, I don't even know where to approach this conversation. Yes, of course, we know that we need more people to stay in the workforce longer, but how do we even start this conversation? And it's like, you can just start it with your DEI policies. Most of them have age in them, but they really mean younger people. They don't actually really think of older people. And there's an opportunity to open up discussions and think about it as part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, at which point people get really motivated because, as I say, on an economic basis, we see what happens during COVID when you didn't have staff.
Yeah.
Businesses closed. And that's what we're looking to quite quickly. So for many people who are thinking about what's the future look like for me, that financial reality may be a combination of, I want to work more. I want to do something with purpose and vibrancy. Maybe I want to work part-time. Maybe I want to create my own business. Maybe I want to volunteer and do something that's got purpose, but don't necessarily have volunteer. We still have that workforce conversation is really important. So we know that healthy longevity piece is going to be critical to that conversation. We need people who are not just willing, but that actively are able to, and that's an important part of our aging conversation in Canada as well.
Yeah, like you said so many things there that I'm like, oh my gosh, where do I even go? So I mean, first of all, I think the part about working longer, right? Well, let's start with even including that in your DEI conversations. Completely agree. That is not like when I'm talking to different organizations, diversity, equity, inclusion does not normally include elder, right? And so you're bang on 100%, and that needs to become more of a focus. But even when you were talking about, oftentimes we get to a certain age and the expectation has been you retire at that age. Well, given the economic changes, you can't afford to. That's one issue. But even the cognitive, right? Like, you see what happened through COVID in a lot of cases where our elderly were isolated and their family was standing outside the window talking to them in some cases, but that cognitive decline. And so the more active they are, the more they use it, the longer they have a stronger cognitive ability. Yeah.
It's so important to that emphasizing that we were able to measure broadly, academics and researchers able to measure that piece of loneliness and social exclusion doesn't just have even a cognitive impact, although it does, a profound one. It actually has a physiological impact. So if you are lonely, your grip strength is reduced. Your ability to walk is compromised. Your stability, your ability to stand upright without wobbling is compromised. And they've done all kinds of great research on this, particularly, a lot of people have seen the good news stories where they have younger kids and older people in the same kind of area working together. There's been great coverage about that. But they measure both how the kids do and how the older people do. And it's astonishing that intergenerationalism is supporting not just cognitive brain health, although it absolutely is. It's also keeping up mental health, and it's keeping up physical health too. So there's great things that we can do. We just need to do them.
Yeah. Well, and so, I think that's part of our conversation today. What are you seeing that's happening with the people you work with, and how, or what can we do about it? And how do we support, more of that? Because I see it too. Like, my mother's older and she lives in another country from me, but when we go visit, I see how engaged she gets versus talking on the phone to her every day, where you can hear that withdrawal. And it's like, what are you doing today? Oh, not much. Right. And so it's, how do we keep them engaged? Because you want them to have not just a long life, but a healthy, happy, engaged life.
We can do a couple of things that are really practical. And at CanAge, we talk about future-proofing your life against social isolation. And the first piece of it is realizing that social isolation can happen to you. Now, since COVID-19, I think we've all seen that social isolation can happen to you. Yeah. Nobody volunteered to become socially isolated. And I do think we all had a sense of how awful that feels, right? We all got an empathetic opportunity to really reflect, oh, this is the lives of many older people. And I'm just feeling it for the first time. And I think we all got a bit squirrely and a bit depressed and a bit,
absolutely, yeah,
climbing the walls, or really just, what's the purpose anymore? I'm going to stay on my sofa. We all know what that feels like. So if we can layer some recipes in there, as I call it, it's a helpful way to check in on your life. The first is, have a look around you. Do you have 3 people that you can reach out to and have a good like a deep conversation of whatever you consider a deep conversation? If a deep conversation is talking about, football statistics, great. Whatever whatever that means to you, right? A deep conversation could mean you call because you need emotional support over a glass of Chardonnay. A deep conversation means you can blow off steam. Whatever that conversation is to you, it's somebody that when you call, they'll answer the phone and spend some time with you. 3 people, that doesn't sound like a lot, but in 2018, Statistics Canada released a report and found that 20% of Canadian seniors, 1 in 5 Canadian seniors, did not have a single person to reach out to, even in the case of an emergency.
Wow.
And I'm not talking about Chardonnay, and wanting to complain about my neighbor as an emergency. I'm talking, I've fallen and I can't get up, or, come help me, there's a flood in my house. 1 in 5 Canadian seniors in 2018 did not have a single person to reach out to in the case of an emergency. So that 3, you have to kind of work at it a little bit.
Yeah.
Then we think about also another number with 3. Do you have people in your life across 3 generations? You know, my mom is, I shouldn't tell her, but she's 86 right now. And I think she's a pretty proud 86. And she's really having a hard time because so many of her friends are starting to have physical or cognitive impairments or frankly pass away.
Mhm.
And, you know, she did her first trip with anyone in 3.5 years. And she was reflecting to me that she was so glad because they had people who were 9 years younger to travel with. And she said, you know, people my age, I'm having a hard time finding people who can do this or want to do this for whatever reason it is. And that 3 generations, you know, could be your kids, could be your grandkids, that's fine. But are there friends that you have too that are across some different generations? And if you don't, if everyone is your age, maybe pay some attention and try to think about
Mm,
that. Then we think
good
about the number
point.
5. So 3 people to reach out to. And then again, if you can find 3 generations, even of people that you know, doesn't
Mhm.
have to be those 3 people, just anyone. Then we think about 5, what the number 5 is. Well, think about 5 things that you can do, whatever that, you know, go for a walk is one of them, or walk the dog. Like, it doesn't need to be a lot of things. Is it that you could watch a webinar series? Is it that you could join a group like men's sheds if you're an older man and you're looking for a group of other men to connect with? You know, are there 5 things in your life? Is it that you're playing online bridge? Like, it could be anything, right? Whatever you like to do, could be with people or not with people. That's okay, but it means that you're active. Could you be learning a language? Could you be, you know,
Mm.
going to a concert? Whatever it is you want. Could be raking your leaves in the backyard and gardening, whatever. And then if you're thinking about the number 15, think about the number of events or people opportunities. People opportunities is what we call them. 15. So think about once a month, and then maybe 3 extra holidays that you might have, whatever holidays you celebrate in your family. So, you know, in January, I am going to meet up with these people, right? It could be family, it could be friends, it could be a group of people that you'd never met before, but it keeps you doing new and interesting things. It could be the same thing that you do 15 times. I'm going to go curling once a month and then, you know, have a curling bunch bill for the 3 extra days. Yeah, that's fine. But that's sort of 3, 5, and 15, the audit of your own life or the audit with an older person. It's actually harder than many folks think it is.
Yeah, I can see that actually.
Right. And it can drop off. And when I say, you know, those contact points, it could be that you talk to your mail carrier, you know, okay. But there's some type of interaction that's happening and new input. And what we know is, don't forget that, you know, being lonely is as bad for us as smoking 15 cigarettes a day and can take up to 8 years off a person's life and
Yeah.
reduces strength and reduces stability. So if it's one thing we can do that stuff.
Yeah. Wow. That's really important. And I think like what I heard through that is making a plan and being very intentional with how you're engaging with life. And that's through your contacts, it's through the things that you do, you know, what if you didn't ever have hobbies, right? Like I look at a couple of my really close friends who have been working machines their whole lives and they love work, have multiple businesses, but now are at a certain age and saying, I can't retire because what will I do?
Oh, yes.
I can't sit and read a book, or I can't just travel all the time, right? But I have no hobbies. And so what I'm hearing you say is being very, very intentional in learning new things, in putting yourself in situations to meet potentially even different people that will expose you to different things and keep you engaged in life, which impacts you physically, mentally, emotionally.
It's okay to be a beginner. And that is a piece often where folks who have been very successful in their careers sometimes can feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Fair enough. What we know about cognitive health and brain health is it's not being good at something. it's learning something. And so if you want to take up the violin and frankly, you're awful at it, you're getting as much brain health out of that than if you were really actually achieving anything but squeaks and squawks. If you pick up a website or an app and you're going to learn a new language, and frankly, your accent is dreadful and you never feel comfortable speaking it, that's okay. You're still getting the same amount of benefit out of it. But particularly, what if you do that and actually combine it with some travel to a country and have that kind of stimulus? I think the piece that's really important to think about for people is, do you have to retire? Lots of people don't. And this whole idea of retirement is really interesting because I don't know if folks know where the number 65 comes from.
Yeah, no, I don't. I would love to hear. I was thinking that the other day, actually. It's like, where did we get this random number and said that's when you need to retire?
So the story goes, and I actually think it's enough of a story that it's probably true. So I'm not going to say that it's 100% true, but this is what everybody says. So I think it's probably true-ish anyway, is it actually comes from Otto von Bismarck. Yes, the one from grade 10 history, the Prussian Otto von Bismarck. And the story goes that after the war, where Bismarck won, came out ahead, the generals came to him and said, the soldiers would like a pension. Now, pensions didn't really exist in the way that we think about them now. Oh, a Roman slave might get a little pension, or, Jane Eyre's, type of housekeeper might get a little pension. But the way that we think about pensions, where you work and it's part of your deferred wages, didn't exist. And so Bismarck was a really canny guy. And apparently, so the story goes, he asked a couple of questions. The first question was, what's the average age of death? And at that point, the average age of death is between sort of 40 and 50. Now, for you math people out there, yes, I do know that if you live the first 5 years, your chances of living longer are good. So average is, one of those numbers. But, the mean age was also in the 50s, okay? So people didn't live very long. So then he asked the next question. What's the oldest person that we have in the military? Well, the oldest person apparently was 67. Okay. So he said, not what you think. He said, fine, I will pay a pension at the age of 75.
Oh.
Which is kind of like earning a pension at about 120
for
those of us right now. And after 10 years, apparently, of never paying a single pension, he needed a political win. Things became hard on the political front. And so with great pomp and circumstance and front page news, he reduced the pension age to 65.
Interesting.
When we started our CPP, when we started working in CPP and OAS and all the good stuff that we were justifiably proud of having in Canada, the average age of death was 67. And so the idea was you worked your whole life, you had 2 years off, and then you died.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when we're asking questions like, why don't we have more seniors care, or why isn't long-term care in our Canada Health Act, which was done in 87. Well, when they did the Canada Health Act, the average age of 74. Yeah. People worked, had a bit more time, got sick very quickly and died. Right. So we are now really spending our time thinking about what longevity means and what is healthy longevity, because the idea of just living longer doesn't mean you're living better and longer.
100%. Yes.
And that's really where the focus conversation is, where if you're going to be, like one of your friends, they love work, they want to keep working. Well, frankly, they probably should keep working, actually. Maybe they want more flexibility in their work. Maybe they want to work and mentor. Maybe they want to do work in slightly different ways than they did before. Maybe they don't want to show up and do 12-hour days every day, 12 months a year. Maybe they want to do something that's different. That is what we need to capture, because we're getting a retirement brain drain as well. So we need to find ways to keep people engaged and interested, but we also need to make sure that they're healthy when they're doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's such a key part of what you're saying, because it can be such a shock to the system when what you've always done is work and you love the work, and then all of a sudden you decide you're going to make that change and stop working, and then what? Right. So I happen to agree with you. I think continuing to work is not a bad thing. I'll look at my own mother as an example. She's 80. She doesn't like anybody to know that. She looks like she's in her late 60s, but she's 80. And up until 2 years ago, she was still building houses. She was still this trailblazer and doing all these things. And then she got a blood clot. And so she had to stop doing those things. And I've seen the impact, to your point, when they don't have that stimulation, right? And she said to me just the other day, she goes, I still have one lot left and I think I want to build that house. And I'm like, and I don't want to discourage her, but I'm going, physically, like, she really struggles, right? Yeah. And more because of the blood clot and just, how she's deteriorated really over the last 2 years because of different things. But you don't want to discourage that either. So it is encouraging that, well, how can you do that? I said to her, like, why don't you teach a class, like how to be your own contractor, or, do things that you'd be able to help people and, share your expertise. Because I think that is important. And we do see more and more seniors working in, different environments, whether it's part-time or whatever. But I think it is important to find that purpose that you were talking about, like, so that you stay actively engaged.
It is so much about purpose. When we've done all the research and all the studies, and what is it that keeps people feeling good?
Yeah.
It's having a purpose. And we all know now, again, I'll ask us to think back about that experience with COVID, what that sense of purposelessness is. It's a hard one to say.
Yeah.
What is it like to wake up in the morning and have no purpose, and also maybe no one to talk to all day long? Now, for some of the introverts in the audience, they may really think that sounds fantastic. And people who are really tired, I'm not talking about I need a break and I want a nap and I'd like even 3 weeks or 4 weeks to do nothing. Absolutely, do those things. That's great. But this idea that nobody cares about me and I don't care about anyone else, that's a problem. Right? Yeah. Even if it's, I care about, my own garden, or I care about having a positive influence on the kids next door, or a pet, any of those types of things. So that sense of having a reason is critically important. And what we know is that overwhelmingly older people are often depressed. And when they seek medical attention, if they seek medical attention, often healthcare professionals don't ask them about their mental health, because we think of that as a younger person's issue.
Yeah.
Or they think, well, of course you're depressed. You're old. It's depressing. And, and that is just sort of like makes my head spin. There's been some studies that have shown for people in long-term care, 40% of people in long-term care in Canada have some form of clinical depression. And then people are like, yeah, of course, they're in long-term care. It's depressing. You're like, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. You're not in long-term care because you're depressed. You're getting depressed because you're in long-term care. That means there's a problem with long-term care. Doesn't mean there's a problem with you, right? If you were
chicken and egg.
In this case, it's the egg. Like, we know that we can do better. And it does also mean that we need to make sure that people have a better experience when they need support and care. We can do that. We know that people need medication and they shouldn't be denied medication, or frankly not have ageist assumptions about what they should be feeling at different parts of their life. And as women, we've been talking about that. We're still trying to talk about menopause. Like, we're trying to bring these conversations so forth. So when we know that later on in life, all of those intersectional assumptions, whether they be racialized or gender or any other thing, also accumulate ever more in our older age. So I'm less worried about the rich, urban, straight white man who's had a long working history and a good social network of friends. I think they're probably going to be fine. I mean, doesn't mean that they may not have some bumps, but I am far more worried about the precariously housed, racialized queer woman who has had a career at low income and has had to come in and out of the workforce because of many different types of issues, including caregiving and supports and so on. Am I worried about her? Yeah, I'm worried about her on a couple of different levels. And I think that's important to remember. We don't all age the same.
Yeah. That's a really important statement, and not presuming that we do, right? Because there's different stages, different ages, like all of those comments are so true. So just one thing that really comes to me, what happens if you think someone is being abused an elderly person? Where do you go? How do you help without creating a bigger problem for them, I guess, is the way I want to ask it.
So there's some things that are the same no matter where you live, and as people I think are really important, and there's some kind of downflow pieces are a little bit different depending on which jurisdiction you're in, which province or territory you're in. So the first thing you can do is go to the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse's website, which is cnpea.ca. So cnpea.ca, and they have every resource associated with how to raise the questions, what to do, and who do you call in which jurisdiction. So Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, really great resource for everybody to go to. And there's even guides on how to bring this up in conversation. The first thing to do is, actually ask people how they're doing. It sounds so obvious, right? But we often don't. Or we say things like, hey, how you doing, Vicky? But I'm not really trying to understand how you are. I'm saying hello. So in this case, trying to understand, how are you doing? If you have a chance of talking to a person, that's easier. Ask them, has anything changed in their life?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're trying to see if something's changed. Now, for people who have lived a long time with violence in their life, like domestic abuse grown old, sadly, it may not have changed too much. Or, the husband who was abusing her when they were younger, now maybe abusing her more because he's home and retired. Like, ask them if there's things that have changed in their life, and what are they up to? Again, these are nice openers and they don't feel threatening to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But show that you're actually really trying to understand. If it's somebody, perhaps a neighbor, or that you used to see outside all the time and then now you don't. I had one of those in Vancouver when I lived. There was an older person that was always in her backyard and out in the front. She was quite frail, but we would always see her and see her every day. And then all of a sudden I didn't see her anymore. And I saw someone else, and it was her ne'er-do-well son, as a matter of fact. And I would go over and knock on the door. Now, I didn't usually do that because we'd be over the fence neighbors, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I did the further thing. I brought over a casserole, how neighbors can, or you drum up a reason saying, oh, I'm going to, I don't know, mow my grass on Saturday. I just make sure I don't want to wake you up. Find some neighborly reason to pop over. If you see the person and they look scared, bruised, worried, frail, that's where, if you can get in their house and try to have a look around, that really helps. I always offer to make a cup of tea, and then I go into the, if they say yes, of course, then I offer to go into the kitchen and grab the milk or whatever. Look in the fridge. Is there any food in the fridge? Is everything, like, does it look hygienic? Does it look like it used to be? Or has it changed since then? Are they mentioning that there's somebody new living at home? Are they talking about not having enough money, right? Like, where can you get to with those types of conversations? If you get down to it and you feel like you're in the conversation, it's okay to ask, do you ever feel uncomfortable? Or does anyone in your life ever make you feel uncomfortable? And then you can get down to, do you ever feel scared? Are you worried about those types of things? And what are you worried about? What we know is that many people will disclose financial abuse first.
Okay.
Maybe they're worried about something to do with money. And what we also know is where there's financial abuse, there's almost always at least one other form of abuse happening. So don't assume just because, okay, now you're hearing like, you know what, the unsuccessful, son in the basement has moved in and to quote, help mom out, and really is now taking over, and mom's now living in the garage, right? And all of a sudden, his buddies are over, you don't see mom anymore. Like, these are real red flags. Or, the lights aren't on in the house anymore, or any of those types of pieces are happening, right? So look for those red flags that you're looking for. If you can't get in, which is really common, right? Someone else is answering the door, or no one's answering the door, or no one's answering the phone, or mom's always asleep, or something,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then you should be worried if you can't get through to that person. If someone else won't leave you alone with that person, right? You've got a hall
Yeah.
monitor, right?
Yeah.
Looming over or
Mhm.
just keeping an eye, and they're glancing around and they're looking worried. Those are red flags too. So those are a few things. Again, the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, or your local network for prevention of elder abuse. If you're in Ontario, as Vicki, you are, you'd go to Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. So EAPO. .ca, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. And there's whole toolkits called, Friends, Families, and Neighbors, It's Not Right. And it can really help to guide you. If you think somebody is in danger, you should call the police. And
Okay.
many people will say, you know what? Oh, I don't know. You don't actually have to give your name. You can actually
Yeah.
call Crime Stoppers.
Yeah. And go
And
anonymous and
you can do it anonymously. And it's called a wellness check, right? You're
mm,
asking for a wellness check. And someone will come to the door and they say, oh, just checking in to make sure that everything's okay. In some places, they have a social worker that comes to. And in also areas, you can sometimes ask the police to come park around the corner and come in plain clothes. So that doesn't, make it
red
worried.
flag
But again,
anyone.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and how it's responded to depends a little bit on different jurisdictions. But again, if you think somebody is an urgent concern, you can call the police.
Yeah. Yeah. That's again, a lot of great information. And, I think what I heard there is pay attention, right? Notice what the patterns or the normal behaviors are of your neighbors or loved ones, or, you know, whether that would be domestic abuse or elderly abuse, like just paying attention. I don't know that much about elder abuse, but like even with domestic abuse, like, it's average of 7 times they go
Yeah.
back to that abuser. And so it's really paying attention to those signs, to your point. And even the refrigerator, like, even with somebody elderly, they don't really pay attention what's in their refrigerator and how long it's been there, and then they get sick. And so there's so many good things that you've just shared. So thank you for that. So if you wanted to share one thing for the audience to walk away with today, what have we not talked about that people need to know about in order to start to make a difference, whether it's ageism in the workplace, or elderly abuse, or suspicion of elderly abuse? What would you want people to walk away with?
A lens. Take away the idea of a lens. Look at anything that you're looking at in your life, and then imagine you're putting a lens over that and ask yourself, how would this affect me in 10, 20, 30 years? How would this respect to my spouse or partner? I heard about my friend or neighbor, maybe their husband just had a stroke. Like, how would I deal with that? How would we deal with it as we age? I'm in human resources and I'm thinking about my domestic, workforce and how my international workforce is. Oh, how is aging going to be playing a role in that? So ask yourself, where is that lens that I can bring, and look through that lens of age and aging for your own personal well-being and really any other thing. And it's amazing what's going to light up in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Laura. Thank you. And so true. And as you were talking, that's kind of what I was doing. I'm thinking, okay, 30 years from now or 20 years from now, how would I be looking at that 10 years from now? Right. And as a society, we tend to be very self-interested instead of looking outside of ourselves. And, you mentioned COVID a number of times, and I think COVID has helped a lot of people, even people who are introverted,
Sure.
recognize the importance of the connections, right? And
my husband, who is an introvert, runs a large company, but is an introvert. After about a month and a half in, he's like, it's okay now, I'm done. I could use some people in my life.
people.
Like, I actually could use, and I'm an extrovert. So I was like, I got there like 3 days in. But,
oh yeah, I don't even think it took me 3 days.
Right. And it's just those important connections. And I guess the last piece that I would offer is, during COVID, we started understanding what role technology can play in our lives, positive
Sure.
roles that technology can play in our life. And it's a myth to think that older people don't use technology, but 87% of Canadian seniors use the internet every single day.
Yeah.
And those numbers drop off after about 85. but they all know how to get on you on Facebook, and they all know how to text you to tell them to call home, right? And they all learned to use Zoom over, FaceTime. Lots and lots did anyway. So all of us to say they may need a little bit of extra prompting or a little bit of orientation over the age of 85, but our pickup is really good. So let's not forget that we need to empower ourselves and then also help people empower themselves. It may just mean that we need to invest a little extra startup time or approach it in a different way. And then all of a sudden, they have a whole new area. I can show my mother Google Earth, and, she loves to travel, and it was during COVID and she couldn't travel. Of course, no one could. And so she traveled with Google Earth, right?
Nice.
All I spent was 5 minutes showing her that it existed, and then took my hands off the keyboard and she took over. So again, sometimes it's just making sure that people are seeing new opportunities for themselves to really walk through that door.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And be very intentional with that and have some patience. Some will be faster at catching on to it. Just have a little patience.
And I say, look, it's not eat, write, and exercise. Of course it's eat, write, and exercise. Everyone knows that, right? But we all know you're supposed to. If everyone did what they were supposed to do, everyone would be eating, writing, and exercise.
Yeah,
right.
true
So
enough.
Right? Let's not think about telling another person what they need to do is go for a run and, have a carrot stick. Okay. We need to be more thoughtful about that than that, right? Let's not just make it reductive. There's a lot of strategic barriers. And if it's because they can't go out because there's no toilets in the public, that's a big problem for a lot of people, not just older people. If there's no benches, if there's no, cuts in the sidewalk, if there's no ways to get around for transportation, that's not just, an age-friendly thing. We need to make it an age-inclusive piece. So think about your whole life and what do we need to do to make it more age-inclusive, and not just eat, right, and exercise, although we all know you're supposed to do that too.
I love that. I love that. No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's wonderful. And I just want to go back to, just quickly recap your recipe. You talked about the 3 contacts, the 3 generational, making sure that you have people from different ages that can support you and also encourage you to see possibilities, the 5 things that you can do, and then planning those 15 events, people or opportunities that you can participate in. I think that's really awesome. And that's also a fun way to engage someone. So if you could, what would you do? Right. And I love even how you used imagination with your mom, showing her Google Earth. And okay, so you can't physically travel, but we can virtually travel. So let's look at how we do that. I think that's awesome. Laura, thank you so much. I know I took a little more of your time than we had planned, but I think this is such an important conversation. And I'm super grateful for the work that you're doing. And it's also remembering we're all going to get there. If we're lucky, we're going to get there. So remember that when you lose patience or get frustrated when somebody's cognitive is repetitive or, they're forgetting, that just exercise a little more patience, count back to 5, whatever it takes to get you to be more responsive versus reactive. And, thank you, Laura. I appreciate you being here. This has been terrific. And I will be following CanAge. I'm sure I'll be tapping into more because, my mom's in the US. And so it's like, how do you navigate these things, even being across a border?
Absolutely.
Those present all kinds of challenges. Yes.
It's true.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Vicki. It was lovely chatting with you today.
Well, I appreciate you. And I want to thank our audience. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you have questions for Laura, where can they reach you? Because I'm sure there's a million other questions that we could have gotten into today, but we just had so much time to tap into it. So how could they best reach you?
Pretty easily, actually. So CanAge.ca, that's CanAge.ca. I always tell people there's an info at CanAge.ca. That's monitored by 8 people. You'll get the fastest possible answer at info@CanAge.ca. We answer everybody that reaches out to us on LinkedIn, of course, Laura Tamblyn Watts and L Tamblyn Watts at Twitter. We're pretty active at Twitter personally, as well as CanAge Seniors on Twitter as well. So lots of great ways to reach out to us. And we do answer everyone who writes us too. It's free to join if you like. All you have to do is go to canage.ca/join. That's CanAge.ca/join. Free to join. Just put your email in and then you're a member.
Awesome. Awesome. So you heard it right there. That's how you can get in touch with Laura, ask more questions or ask of her team. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions after you've listened to this episode. And I want to thank our audience. I know you have lots of opportunity to listen to many different episodes of podcasts. And so we're grateful that you listen to Women in Leadership Talk. And if you're curious about your leadership, you can go online to wilempowered.com and you can take our free leadership quiz, which will give you insight as to how you lead as an individual. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we will be very excited to see you at our next podcast. Take care. Have a super day.